Hey, hello, how are ya? And welcome back to my channel. And Happy New Year! I still wanted to do a December wrap up so that I can talk about all of the books that I read in December. I actually read 10 books this month, which I think is a record so far. I don't even know how I did that, but I read 10 books and I want to tell you about them. So let's get into it. The first book that I read this month is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. I am a huge Twilight fan. I have been watching the movies for years, but this is my first time reading through the books. So I was super excited when I got this one on hold from the library so I could listen to the audiobook. If you don't know, it's a romance book, came out in 2005. This is a vampire book. It's about this girl named Bella. She falls in love with this guy, Edward. He's a vampire. And it's about all of the complications that a human-vampire relationship might create. We watch the Twilight movies every year. It is an annual event in our household. That is how intense we are about it. And Josh is actually planning on reading Twilight as well so that we can discuss all the differences between the movies and the books. I found that I feel like the book and the movie are pretty close, which is always cool when you go back and read something that you've already watched to see that they stayed pretty close to the source material. So that was fun. I did give it 4 stars just because I feel like obviously the writing is not the best. Like Twilight is not famous for just having like amazing literature, but I love the story. So I gave it 4 stars, but I would definitely recommend for sure. The next book that I read was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is a memoir. It came out in 2021. This is the story of Michelle Zauner's life, especially about the time surrounding her mom's death. Her mom battled with cancer, and so a lot of this book talks about that. She's also an accomplished musician, goes by the name Japanese Breakfast if you've heard of her. But the book is not just about her mom passing from cancer, it's also just about her life. And so it kind of jumps back and forth talking about Michelle's life and growing up with her mom and her relationship with both of her parents. But then also what it was like, walking through that illness with her mother. It doesn't tell it in a linear way, but I don't think that that was a problem at all. Like, it didn't feel messy. It felt succinct. Like, I'd never believed that, like, this was her first book. Like, she just chose to write this, and, like, she feels like a writer. Like, her writing style feels very professional. It doesn't feel, like, flippant or anything. The book felt really well thought out, which is great, especially because she's talking about big topics, like grief and what it's like growing up mixed race. She is half white and half Korean. This book was so beautiful and also so heartbreaking. If you've ever gone through a family member having cancer, this book might be a little bit triggering for you just because it does go in depth, and that was something that was a little bit challenging to read about, but it's also important all the same. As someone who is, believe it or not, a quarter Asian as well, I could definitely relate to Michelle's experiences with losing a family member and feeling like you've lost all of your ties to that part of your culture and feeling bad about the fact that you didn't spend as much time learning from them as you could have while they were still here. That was like super poignant, and I definitely felt that for sure. But I highly recommend this book, especially to anyone that has any sort of Asian heritage. It was hard and sad, but it also made me so happy. So I gave this one 5 stars. All right, the next book was the first of any of the books that I ended up reading from the My Husband Picks My TBR video. The first one that I read was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I gotta say, I didn't love this one. I gave it 3 stars because I feel like 3 stars, like that's the rating that I give a book when I'm like, it wasn't bad, it just wasn't my cup of tea. And that's definitely how I felt about this one. I think that it just wasn't fun. I've talked about this before. I love to be able to escape when I read a book. I love to have a good time and kind of forget about reality, and I didn't feel like this book did that for me. But I am glad that I can say finally that I have read it, because it's absolutely embarrassing the lack of classics that I've read in my life. So I'm glad I have this one under my belt now. After that one, I read Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. This book came out in 2022. It's a romance. It's about this girl that has to move back home because her father passes away, and her and her brother are supposed to go through all the stuff in his house and get it ready to be sold. And while she's there, she meets this mysterious neighbor, and because she's super into true crime, like so into it that she's doing her dissertation about that, she's very suspicious of this man, and she's like, I'm pretty sure that he's a serial killer. So it's super funny, but also I really liked that, like, I feel like that was kind of realistic. Not that I think about true crime all the time, but I think that when I read a romance book, like, to a degree, you have to suspend disbelief because you know that it's fake. But in real life, whenever I am around any man that I don't know, I'm immediately suspicious. I think that women are just used to that. Unfortunately, we've got to be on our guard all the time. And in romance books, a lot of times women are not like that. They're just like, oh, a strange man, that's cute, okay, let's go out. And this girl was not like that. She was definitely cautious and trying to vet him out, and I really appreciated that because, like I said, it's not only funny but it's also relatable. I gave this one 4 stars. Didn't give me that 5-star feeling, but it was definitely really good and cute and funny. I would give it 3 out of 5 for spice, and also it takes place in the summer, so I feel like that'd be the best time to read it. The vibes were a little bit off reading it in December, so if you're gonna give it a go, I'd suggest to do it in the summer. Next up, I read A Holly Jolly Ever After by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone. I have words about this book. I alluded to it a little bit in my end of the year book tag, but this is one of the worst books that I've read this year. I feel like it's marketed as just like a normal romance book. It's a Christmas romance book. No, it's not. First of all, it's not a Christmas book. It doesn't take place during Christmas. It surrounds 2 characters that are making a Christmas movie, but most of the book takes place in January, and then it like slowly goes through the rest of the year, but it's not a Christmas book. So that is the first thing that disappointed me, because I was like, oh my god, how have I never read a Christmas romance? So I picked this one up. I was super stoked about it. Not a Christmas romance. Cool. Also, it's the 2nd book in a series. Didn't realize that. That didn't really matter because it's like, they're more like companion books, not like, you know, you need to read them one after the other because they're about different couples. So that's fine, I guess, but that's also not ideal. My biggest issue with this book, it centers around the adult film industry. That's not something that I totally want to read about. I think that that's very different than just like a regular romance book with some spicy scenes. I'm all for that, for sure. But this was on another level, and also the writing was absolutely atrocious. Like, I was telling Josh about it, just being like, oh, how ridiculous is that? And Josh was like, oh, they know what they're doing. Like, the authors must know that, like, this is gonna be hilarious. And I was like, I don't think so. Because normally that's not the case. Like, obviously, romantic comedy is definitely a genre. But to me, as somebody that reads romance books all the time, unlike Josh, I know that they're being dead serious and that they thought this was gonna be a great plot for a book. I disagree. It wasn't for me. I gave it 1 star because I really hated it. And also, it ends with a trope that I absolutely despise. If you don't want to know what it is, skip forward a couple seconds. It's the pregnancy trope. Gross. That's not hot. Like, you can't just... I disagree vehemently that writers might think it's a good idea to have a couple that's struggling in their relationship and then just throw a pregnancy in there and then that fixes it. No. Unrealistic, not okay, not cute, I don't like it. So that's also in here, and that takes up a good amount of the book. It's not just like the very end, it's like maybe 50 or 60% through. I didn't like that. Not for me. I will be getting rid of this book.
Hello!
I brought Josh because this next book we both ended up reading and you actually picked it for me. So I figured we could talk about it together.
Yeah, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
By Grady Hendrix.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Okay, so when it started, the first maybe 50 or so percent, like easily the first half of the book, was incredible. I could not put it down.
Yeah.
I was listening to it and, I was just doing a bunch of chores and stuff, and I listened to the entire first half in pretty much one sitting because it was just so good. I was so sucked into it and I didn't want to stop. And then suddenly at about 55, 56%, something changed and the pacing just like fell off a cliff. I don't know why. I just really couldn't care. Like,
Yeah.
It was like I was sitting there and it was all I wanted to do was just keep listening to it. And then after that, it was like, I think I went like a day or two before I picked it back up again. I kept trying. I'd get 3% through, maybe like 20 minutes farther into the audiobook, and I'd be like, I don't care. I don't know what happened. There is a time jump at about, like, I don't know, maybe, I don't remember where specifically, but when it happens, it's just like, well, I don't care anymore. And it kind of, we talked about it a lot, like we agreed, it kind of felt like he didn't know how to resolve something, so he just kind of was like, let's just skip ahead a little.
Yeah. That part felt really half-baked to me, honestly. Like, that was really frustrating that there was, like, momentum building, and then there's, like, a big thing that happens. It feels a little bit unresolved, and then there's just a time jump. And you're just like, oh, okay. And you kind of have, like, whiplash from it.
Yeah.
But you were, like, on the edge of DNFing it for a second.
I did, yeah. I am constantly getting new holds from Libby, and... at that time, I think I had 4 or 5 waiting for me, and I was like, I don't give a shit, and there's so much more stuff I need to be reading right now. But, she kept talking about it with me, and my mom also was reading it with us, too. So, together it was like, okay, let's just pound the rest of this out. We talked about it, too. I feel like the last half, I did still enjoy some pieces of it. I just read Salem's Lot by Stephen King like a month ago, and I loved it way, way more than I thought. I'd seen the Tobe Hooper movie. We watched it together, the TV movie, and it's cool, but it's so slow. And so when I read this, I was kind of scared it'd be like that, but this book was incredible. So good. And so going from this and then just a month later reading that, I was kind of surprised. It didn't feel like the book was trying to be like, hey, like, remember Salem's Lot? Like, it wasn't like that, but...
Right. I mean, it references it.
It does.
Is cool, because at least that's, like, self-aware, but basically what you're saying is, if you're interested in Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, just read Salem's Lot instead.
I feel like Grady Hendrix tried to kind of write this, like, the cast is this group of engaging older women, and it's cool, but it's also, like, I feel like this sounds kind of like weird, but I almost feel like the book would have been better if it was written by a woman.
I completely agree.
Like, we talked about that a lot after we finished it. Like, there's
Yeah.
stuff that happens in it that I just feel like, you know, the rules of art, there are no rules. You ultimately can write about whatever you want. That's fine. But, like, I do feel like just some things required a little bit more of a feminine perspective. And I can't, you know, we can't go into, like, spoilers about it. But
Right. Well, there's like specifically one instance that happens that did upset me, and honestly, I would suggest to look up trigger warnings from this book because
yeah.
I wasn't expecting that, and that did kind of ruin it for me a little bit. And honestly, I think that if it was written by a woman, that situation either wouldn't have happened or it would have been handled with so much more care.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Yeah. It felt kind of like it was there to reinforce that, like, what's happening is bad and this is a bad person or whatever. You know, again, we can't talk about what happened.
Yeah.
And ultimately, for it being like a horror book, like, I read a ton of horror, and, you know, maybe I'm jaded, but, like, there was only one scene that stood out to the two of us. There's this, to anyone who's read it, you know, the attic scene. There's a really, really good scene involving that.
That was the only time where I was like on the edge of my seat, holding my breath, because I was like, oh my god, what's gonna happen?
Yeah.
But the rest of the book, I felt like I wasn't as invested, and then honestly, I think that the ending was bad. I'll just say it. I think that I think the ending was half-baked too, and it just left me feeling dissatisfied.
I almost feel like I was more interested in the story of the characters' lives before anything weird starts happening.
Yeah.
Like, a couple months back, I read Severance by Ling Ma, and the same thing kind of was happening. It was like two stories, and, you know, one of them is before this kind of apocalyptic event, and then the rest of the book is everything that's happening after, you know. And I found that I really didn't care about the after stuff. I was actually super invested in all the stuff about her life as this character working in the publishing industry. I thought that was a really interesting story. And so I loved a lot of that book, but I really, really didn't care about half of that book.
Yeah.
And I felt that way with this. I feel like if the first half, it was more about this group of women trying to, like, find happiness in lives that are kind of weighed down by the weight of the men around them. Like, I did find that pretty engaging.
Yeah. It also takes place like in the late 80s and early to mid 90s. So there are certain things that it's like, okay, maybe that wouldn't be that way now. But overall, I gave it a 3 stars.
I also gave it a 3 stars.
So some people might like it.
My mom loved it.
Your mom loved it.
Yeah, and I think that, like, it could be like a cultural and generational thing. The Southern Book Club. It's a group of Southern women. My mom has family from the South, and, you know, there's some heritage there, and I know that probably resonated with her. So if you have, you know, any ties to that, you probably will get more out of it than, you know, us. But I just feel like the last half and all of the vampire-y stuff, that's not a spoiler because it's in the title, I didn't care, and you didn't really care. I will say one last thing, the description of the thing was cool. Again, to anyone who read it, like, again, I've read a lot of vampire books, and I did like Grady Hendrix' kind of description of the thing, and
Yeah.
I thought that was cool. But yeah, I didn't really feel like the last half was very compelling.
Yeah. I mean, overall, we were kind of just like, okay, I don't get why it had so much hype when it came out. Like, what do people like about this? I mean, yeah, we talked to your mom and she told us how she felt about it. But, like, on the whole, I think a lot of people that were reading it were closer to our age. So I'm like, what did y'all like about it? Like, I don't understand because I didn't think it was great. So, 3 stars.
3 stars, yeah.
Yeah, glad that we read it together. That was a fun experience.
It was.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yes.
Thanks. The next book that I read after that was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. That was another one that Josh picked for me. This book is a thriller. It came out in 2021. This book is about a group of friends that met in college, and while they were in college, one of those friends was murdered. And it kind of gets blamed on that person's significant other, but it can't be proven, so they're never arrested, and it kind of just goes on as like a cold case. Fast forward 10 years, they're having their reunion, and the girl who got murdered, her brother, who was like a couple years younger than them, so he went to the school as well. He makes it like his mission to use the reunion as his chance to finally figure out who murdered his sister, and he's like dead set on the fact that it was somebody in the friend group. It just wasn't her boyfriend that had gotten blamed for it. I feel like the writing was pretty solid, a little bit cringe at times. The chapters do jump from the past to the present throughout the whole book, but it's not linear, and it did feel messy. That was a little bit frustrating for me. I would have much preferred to have had them be going in order so that you're like slowly seeing what was going on up until the murder happens, but that's not how it's written. So if you want to try this one out, just keep that in mind. It is a little bit all over the place with the timeline, and you do have to like really pay attention to not get lost. The plot's just like centering around this big group of friends from college, minus the murder. Reminded me of Friends from College on Netflix, just in that it's like, it's really messy. There are relationships that get crossed, and it felt like that, but just like with an element of danger. They've all got a lot of secrets that they're keeping from each other, even though they claim to be really close. The climax of the book was a little bit wild, but like nothing too crazy. If you read a lot of thrillers, you are used to that, so it didn't feel like totally outlandish. But if you're new to thrillers, it might be like, whoa, what the heck is going on? So there's that. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I think it's pretty good. I do think that if you want a book with this type of plot, I think The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley is like just a step above. So I would recommend that one over In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. After that, I read All Adults Here by Emma Straub. This is a literary fiction. It came out in 2020. This is another one that Josh picked for me, and I'm glad that I got to it this month so that I can finally take it off of my TBR shelf, because I've had this for a while and it's just been sitting there staring at me. So glad that I finally got to it. But I will say I was a little bit slash a lot disappointed, because I was really hoping that I would love this book as much as I loved This Time Tomorrow. Anybody that's watched any of my videos knows I love that book so much, and this did not hit the same way for me personally. I don't think that the writing was bad, but the story is kind of like a coming of age story, but it's about a whole family, not just one person, like an extended family. And if you personally have a family that has any level of dysfunction to it, this is not going to be a fun read for you. If you come from a family that's perfect, this might be really interesting, but I don't. I come from a family with levels of dysfunction. So this wasn't fun. It didn't feel like an escape for me. It felt a little bit too real, and I didn't love that. Also, if you're looking for a book with like just a pretty simple linear plot, there's a bad guy, there's a climax, a resolution, that's not going to be this. Like, there are some little bombs that the family members drop on each other, and this book just goes through a few months in their life, just dealing with stuff like that and trying to grow and change together. But it does feel kind of like it meanders a little bit because there's no like big climax. I don't know. It just kind of felt like I felt the time. Like, as I was reading it, there would be moments where I'd be like, okay, how far am I through this book? Like, I'm ready to be done soon. So that makes me sad. I gave it 3 stars because, again, I feel like it was a pretty good book, but it just wasn't for me. But it does make me sad that it did not hold a candle to This Time Tomorrow. So that makes me a little bit nervous to try another one of her books. I do want to try another one of her books, but I just don't have any idea how that'll go, because I don't know if it's that This Time Tomorrow was like an outlier or if this one's the outlier. You know what I mean? Then I finally read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I've been trying to read this one for a long time. I read The Radleys by him earlier this year and I was obsessed. So I can definitely say that I do like his writing because I liked it in this one as well. This book came out in 2020. It was super popular. There was lots of hype. So I've been wanting to get to it. And I'm glad that I have, because I gave this one 5 stars. I feel like, for me at least, there are multiple types of 5-star books. Like, some of them you're just like, oh my god, you're so passionate about it, you can't stop talking about it, you love it so much, you think about it all the time. And then there are other 5-star books where you're just like, yes, that was a good book. I'm glad that I read that. I would recommend it to somebody else. But it's just like a calm 5 stars. And I felt like this was one of those. This was a calm 5-star book. Like, I was getting towards the end and I was like, ah, yes, a 5-star book. I really liked that. But I was just chill about it. This is a book about a woman that basically has like the worst day of her life and decides she's just gonna end it. And she wakes up in the Midnight Library. It's a place in her mind between life and death where she gets the opportunity to basically try on other variations of her life that she could have had based off of different decisions that she could have made at different points in her life. It's a really interesting concept. It reminds me a little bit of This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub and also Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I really liked the whole like alternate realities thing. It's fun to see her just like get put into a situation where she has no idea like what she's going into because this is a different version of her life, and watching her figure that out and slowly figure out what she felt like went wrong in her root life and how she would want to change that if she could go back. And I really liked how this book ended. I liked the resolution. I thought it was really good and I would definitely recommend it, and I definitely feel like it deserves all the hype that it's gotten. All right, we did it. We made it to number 10. The last book that I read in 2023 was New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. After I finished Twilight in the beginning of the month, I was so sad that I didn't have access to New Moon right away. I had to wait for it for a couple weeks to get it on audiobook from Libby, the library app. And once I did, I was so stoked because I was so sad to finish Twilight. Like, I didn't want to leave that world because I love it so much. So I was very into New Moon. It was a great time. I feel like it provides a lot of context for the love triangle between Bella and Jacob and Edward that the movies don't. I feel like, to me at least, the movies felt like kind of like Bella is using Jacob and she's manipulating him, but in the books it feels very different, and I just thought that that was interesting. I love to get more background info since I've already seen the movies. So I did just give this one 5 stars because I was like, no, you know what? I love this. I love the series, and I'm so glad that I got to read this one. And I'm very excited to read the last 2, hopefully within the next month. Yeah, I love Twilight. Thank you, Stephanie Meyer, for this gift that you've given the world. All right, that's everything. That's all of them. That is all 10 books that I read this month. I've got to say, I'm proud of myself because I didn't know that I had it in me. But 10 books. Wow. Hopefully I can replicate that as we go through the next year. I would love to be able to continue to read so many books each month, so we'll see. I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like. Comment down below, tell me what you read in December. Tell me what you're excited to read in January. If you like this channel, subscribe. And all of my links to all of my social media accounts are in the description if you want to follow me on Instagram, Goodreads, Spotify, hey, Pinterest, why not? Yeah, so I'll see you next time. Bye.